Just a quick heads up, this film's a murder mystery that pretty much spoils who the killer is within 40 to 50 minutes of its 90-minute runtime. As a result, I can't really talk about this film in any degree of detail unless I spoil who the killer is in the process. If you just want a quick should I watch this or not, it's a big no from me anyway. Don't be fooled by the advertising of this film either, it's completely misleading. Anyway, so yeah, spoiler warning for what's ahead, okay? Okay. Keith Chegwin is a Liverpool-born actor and television presenter who's been on UK screens for well over 50 years at this point. He started acting in bit roles on TV, stage and film when he was a child in the late 1960s, but he's probably best remembered for effectively owning UK kids television from the mid-70s until the mid-80s. During that time, he was the main host of two of the UK's biggest kids' TV shows, Multicoloured Swap Shop and Saturday Superstore. He was so successful he even had his own programme, Cheggers Plays Pop, which more or less is what it sounds like it is. He was loved and adored by children and young adults up and down the country for the best part of a decade and beyond. He cared about his position, and he cared that the kids cared about him. He was a professional in every sense of the word with a unique ability to ad-lib. He wasn't particularly a mega wit, I mean we aren't talking Groucho Marx here, but he had his own style and he was quick on his feet, and these qualities would ultimately save him time and again from ruin. Chegwin's popularity began to wane in the late 80s, an event that also coincided with his slow decline into alcoholism. He would come to be ridiculed and generally seen as a bit naff by the public during this time. However, he bounced back, and by the mid-1990s he'd overcome his alcohol issues and was back on course. And apart from the horrifically poor decision to appear as the completely naked host on Channel 5's early 2000s quiz show Naked Jungle, a decision he's gone on to say was the worst decision of his career, he currently exists in a kind of cheery bubble, doing work when it's available and largely cruising on the nostalgia factor of starry-eyed kids who are now working men and women in their 40s and 50s. He largely sticks to game shows and the odd bit of live television work for morning programming these days. There isn't really anyone to compare him to from an international standpoint. The UK has this unique level of sub-celebrity, where they aren't well off enough to relax and live off their earnings, but at the same time, the format that made them a success just doesn't really exist anymore. They're castaway celebs, still grafting away, doing what they can to keep the cash flowing, not necessarily struggling, but wanting to continue living the lifestyle they've become accustomed to. So with all that in mind, Kill Keith is a 2011 sort of romance, sort of comedy, sort of horror, sort of thriller, directed by Andy Thompson and written by Thompson, Pete Benson and Tim Major, who combined have 3 writing credits between them. As a result, not only does this film suffer from a case of too many kooks, it also suffers from the fact that these writers come across as if they weren't very experienced in doing what they were doing. Researching Andy Thompson's work, it would appear he's more of a producer than a director, as his only other directing credit was the 2009 film The Scarecrow. So we have a writer-director and 2 additional writers who've all only worked on 2 to 3 films collectively. Good start. Kill Keith follows Danny, a floor runner on a morning TV show who's infatuated with the host of the show, Dawn. Her co-host, Cliff, has announced he's leaving the show and speculation runs rife on who'll replace him, with several real-life celebrities, including Joe Pasquale, Tony Blackburn and Keith Chegwin, all in the running. It's at this point that the film pretty much splits into 2 halves, with the main plot being Danny and Dawn spending a good 70 minutes playing the will they won't they game, with the TV station acting as a framing device to give them scenes together and to give the film its comedy element at the hands of the additional characters who work there, while the second plot follows a mysterious killer who keeps bumping off the celebrities in line for the co-hosting job. The 2 plots finally intertwine in the end with a race against time to stop a bomb from exploding in the studio. So the big spoiler that I have to get out of the way before I can really get into the meat and gravy of this review is that the killer is Keith Chegwin, which is not only revealed less than halfway through the film, but flies in the face of all the promotional material, the DVD box, and the film's trailer. The promotional material implies that Keith Chegwin's not only a victim in this film, but also the main character. It makes out that Keith's going to take on the killer, or at minimum that he's going to have to try and avoid being killed. The DVD box actually has him dressed up as the bride from Kill Bill, which if you've seen those films would imply that he's playing some kind of a hero. You could argue that it's subverting expectations, but I call bull on that. Keith doesn't even turn up in this film that has his name in the titles until the 12-minute mark, and collectively I'd be surprised if he's in it for more than 35 minutes throughout. There are other celebrities who appear in this film as well who get top billing and are implied to have significant roles, but they only appear on screen for roughly 10 minutes each as well, which is really shocking. The script is frankly dire. The plot is so vague and uncertain of what it wants to be that it ends up more often than not feeling almost improvised. There's really no consistency in terms of what it wants the audience to feel, and quite often it relies on daydream sequences to help give the film a quirky element. Which doesn't really work, as the comedy here falls absolutely flat. If you find stepping in dog poo, badly timed fart jokes, or gags about mock oral sex hilarious, then I can only recommend this film. It all just feels very dated and uncertain about whether it wants to target a younger or older audience. The dialogue feels like it was written by a chatbot, it has no human element, no spark, and it has a real effect on the actors' performances. The only two actors who genuinely give a good performance in this are Chegwin, who for the most part plays himself but equally is very good when in killer mode, demonstrating a real devious streak that he plays very well, and Stephen Chance as Brian Stokes, a creepy quizmaster who's socially awkward and has the honour of the one recurring, genuinely amusing joke in the film, which is that he awkwardly and abruptly finishes everyone's sentences in any scene he's in. It's a gag that doesn't sound funny on paper, but it fluctuates wildly between being irritating and farcically hilarious.
Mr. Stoke. Mr. Stoke? Mr. Stoke? Hello. They need the...
Questions.
That's right. I'm in a bit of a...
Rush.
Yeah. Thanks. Sorry to...
Disturb.
Yeah.
These two give great performances and are consistent more or less throughout. They're also some of the least used characters in the whole film, which is a real shame. The cast we end up stuck with for the majority of the film range from just about tolerable to absolutely insufferable. None of them act like realistic characters. They all feel like they've been given a small piece of paper with a character trait on, and that's all they have. Cliff's an arsehole, Danny's unlucky in love, Dawn appears as confident but has a vulnerable side, and that's all they have to go on. The direction itself isn't much to write home about either. Again, I don't know if it's the script or the cast, but the director just doesn't seem to be able to get the best out of them in this. I can feel his efforts coming through in some sections. The dungeon scenes in Keith's house are actually quite well done, but the bulk of this film just feels phoned in and half-hearted. There's no passion from the cast, and their actions throughout the film don't come across as genuine. It's a real missed opportunity. The soundtrack as well is depressing. Most of the songs featured are upbeat numbers, but they're all sound-alike tracks, and not particularly good ones. The horror elements of this soundtrack are all fairly generic as well. It ultimately left me feeling a bit irritated. I'd have rather them settled for a generic score than try to recreate original compositions poorly. The editing is a game of two halves. The offline editing is somewhat stable, though they've nicked Edgar Wright's style for a couple of shots near the opening, and there are a few dodgy cover-ups where they've had to merge multiple takes together. But for the most part, it's steady. If anything, it's the online editing that makes this film suffer. It has terrible CGI moments, one of the worst fake explosions I've ever seen, and some awful Photoshop designs that are used throughout. The biggest praise I can give this film from a technical standpoint is the cinematography, which I must say is very impressive in places. The studio scenes of the television network look ridiculously cheap. In fact, there are several scenes that look ridiculously cheap. In particular, there's an advert for Muesli halfway through this film, and I have actually seen better attempts done by film students in high school. I wish I was joking. But the cinematography tries its best to get good results out of this film, and again, the dungeon sequences and some of the set pieces of this film are very, very well done. I mean, like, on a par with legitimate feature films very well done. So I really have to give kudos to whoever was cam-opping or working the cinematography on this film. You've made a purse out of a sow's ear. Kill Keith was released by the Metrodome Group in 2012. It's a nice, clean copy of the film that plays absolutely fine. The extra features include a making-of that does seem to drone on a bit, and a very brief feature entitled How Would You Kill Keith? That runs to about 2 and a bit minutes and literally is just shaky phone footage of Tony Blackburn, Joe Pasquale and Les Dennis saying how they would kill Keith. In short, this is a fairly bare-bones release. It doesn't add anything extra to the film, and to be honest, based on what I've seen, I don't think there's anything else that could have been added to this. Kill Keith is a bad film. It misrepresents itself before you've even seen a frame of it, and what is present is an incoherent mess of a film that doesn't know what it wants to be and doesn't seem that bothered about impressing anyone. Literally the only reasons to watch this film are Keith Chegwin and Steve Chance's scenes, which are actually quite funny, the nice in places cinematography, and the chance to hear family entertainer and comedian Joe Pasquale say the word fuck and minge, which was genuinely the most shocking thing in this film to me. It's a bit like hearing Mr. Rogers say shit. It's a cheap-looking film that comes across like it's above its station. I really feel sorry for Chegwin in all of this, who seems to be quite a nice man by all accounts. To be dragged into a film that is this shocking is deeply saddening. Chegwin has luckily continued to have reasonable success in other televisual escapades since this, but this film is to me a sad avenue that left me feeling sorry for anyone involved. Don't buy this film, don't even talk about this film. Let it disappear into obscurity and hope that the damage can be undone.